Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. Today we're going to take a look at the case of the infamous Curtis Warren. Curtis Francis Warren, who was also known as Cocky, was born on the 31st of May 1963. He is an English gangster and a drug trafficker who was formerly Interpol's target number 1 and was once listed on the Sunday Times rich list. Curtis Warren is the second son of South American-born Curtis Aloysius Warren, a seaman with the Norwegian Merchant Navy, and Antonia Santre, the daughter of a shipyard boiler attendant. He grew up with his elder brother, Ramon, and his sister Maria in Toxteth, Liverpool. After Mr. Warren was released from jail, local police commented that he had turned his life around working as a bouncer in a Liverpool nightclub. But it was here that he learnt about the drugs trade, as bouncers have the power to control who comes in and outside of the venue. He was able to control dealers, access and then befriend them, giving him an inside education. In the late 1980s, Mr. Warren came to a working agreement with Middlesbrough businessman Brian Charrington. In September 1991, using Mr. Charrington's personal yacht, the two men sailed to France on a then legal British visitor passport. They then travelled to Venezuela on a 10-year British passport and arranged a deal with the Cali cartel to smuggle cocaine in steel boxes concealed in legged ignots. On arrival to the UK, HM Custom and Excise cut open one ingot but found nothing. Having let the shipments pass, they were later informed by Dutch police that the drugs were held in steel boxes, by which time Mr. Charrington, Mr. Warren and the shipment were untraceable. However, a second shipment of 907 kilograms using the same method was already in transit from South America. When the shipment landed in the UK in early 1992, Mr. Charrington, Mr. Warren and 26 others were placed under arrest in a prosecution brought by HM Custom and Excise. However, in the preliminary court procedures, it was revealed by police that Mr. Charrington was a police informant for the North East Regional Crime Squad. HM Customs officials went forward with their prosecution despite protests from his police handlers Harry Naggs and Ian Whedon. In Newcastle Crown Court, it was alleged that Mr. Warren was so well informed that he knew the length of the largest drill bit owned by HM Customs, and therefore the size and depth of the required ignots. Eventually though, through Conservative MP Tim Devlin, a meeting was arranged in which Customs was ordered to drop the charges against Mr. Charrington on the 28th of January 1993. The case was dropped with all the accused, including Mr. Warren, acquitted of all charges. It is alleged that on release, Mr. Warren purposely walked past the HM Customs agents saying, "I'm off to spend my 87 million from the first shipment and you can't touch me." Several months later, Mr. Naggs was spotted by HM Customs officials driving a £70,000 BMW previously registered to Mr. Charrington. Mr. Warren returned to Liverpool, but with the combination of various ritual killings of several organised crime figures and the police pursuing him following the high profile case failure, he decided he had to move. In 1995, Mr. Warren relocated to a villa in Sassenheim in the Netherlands. He owns casinos in Spain, nightclubs in Turkey, a vineyard in Bulgaria, land in Gambia, and money stashed away in Swiss bank accounts. He could have retired rich, but he decided to continue. Monitored by police calling his contacts in the UK, it was now that Mr. Warren's photographic memory was useful to him. He never called contacts by their names, but by code words. All of the Swiss bank account details were kept in his mind, never written down, and he never kept accounts for his drug dealing business. The result was that he had an unlimited credit line from the cartels in South America and with cannabis traffickers in Turkey and Eastern Europe. On the 24th of October 1996, the special police officers from the Netherlands raided Mr. Warren's villa and other property that he owned in Netherlands. Mr. Warren and several associates were arrested, with police finding 3 guns, ammunition, hand grenades, crates with CS canisters, 400 kilograms of cocaine, 1,500 kilograms of cannabis resin, 60 kilograms of heroin, 50 kilograms of ecstasy, and 400,000 Dutch guilder, plus 600,000 US dollars in cash. The whole haul was estimated to be £125 million. Mr. Warren made his only appearance in the Sunday Times rich list, which stated as a property developer, his fortune was estimated at £40 million. His conviction in the subsequent trial ensured his removal. In court, Mr. Warren's plan was shown to be the shipment of South America cocaine to Bulgaria. Shipped to his vineyard, the drugs were then suspended in wine for onward shipment to the Netherlands and then Liverpool in the UK. In total, police had regained illegal goods, drugs and wine valued at £125 million. Mr. Warren was sentenced to 12 years in jail in a maximum security Dutch prison in Voort. However, further forensic accounting investigations only found 20 million of his estimated 120 million fortune, and none of that could be legally touched or confiscated by the Dutch police, British police or Interpol. On the afternoon of the 15th of September 1999, Mr. Warren had a fight in a prison yard with a Turkish national, Samuel Gaklu, who was serving a 20-year sentence for murder and attempted murder. Yelling abuse at Mr. Warren, Mr. Gaklu walked towards him and tried to punch him in the face. Evading the punch, a short fight ensued, during which Mr. Gaklu fell to the ground and Mr. Warren kicked him in the head 4 times. Mr. Gaklu got up and went again for Mr. Warren and was again punched to the ground. It was here that he hit his head and became unconscious, from which Mr. Gaklu never recovered and died in hospital. In his trial defence in 2001, Mr. Warren said he had acted in self-defence. Finding Mr. Warren guilty of manslaughter, the Dutch judge commented that the defendant had used excessive violence, sentencing him to an additional 4 years, with release scheduled in 2014. In 2002, Dutch police, still investigating the Bulgarian shipment, obtained an asset seizure order against Mr. Warren. Although they could only find £180,000, they legally charged him to repay 26 million guilders, which is $14 million, under the Proceeds of Crime Act, or face an added 5 years in prison. This would have extended his release date to 2019. After a legal discussion ensued, Mr. Warren agreed to pay Dutch police 50 million guilders, which is just short of $8 million. In February 2005, Mr. Warren was charged by the Dutch authorities for running an international drug smuggling cartel from his Dutch prison cell. Moved around 6 jails during his trial for his own safety, he was found guilty but successfully appealed and was released from prison in June 2007. Refused a passport by the British, Irish and Portuguese governments, the UK Serious Organised Crime Agency then followed Mr. Warren's every move as part of a lifetime offender management programme under the codename Operation Floss. In November 2007, Mr. Warren's former right-hand man, Colin Smith, was shot dead whilst leaving Nell's gym in Spate. Under the Soccer's Operation Floss, just 3 weeks after being freed from prison in the Netherlands, on Saturday the 30th of June 2007, Serious Organised Crime Agency officers called Jersey police to inform them that Mr. Warren had arrived at Manchester Airport and paid cash for a plane ticket. Observed in Jersey with a known Liverpool associate and now Jersey resident Taffin Carter, the pair drove around in Mr. Carter's VW Golf to various locations, included the isolated St. Catherine's Breakwater, with drugs at 3 times the street price in Jersey compared to the rest of the UK or France. After Mr. Warren returned to the UK, Jersey police created Operation Koala, monitoring and bugging various locations including phone boxes and the home of Mr. Taffin's girlfriend, Suzanne Skur. From this, they discovered that a friend of Mr. Warren, John Welsh, intended to travel to Amsterdam to meet with a known Warren associate, the Moroccan Mohamed Lazid. Jersey police wanted to bug Mr. Welsh's hire car from St. Malo, but were refused permission by French and Belgian police, saying it was a breach of the European Conventions of Human Rights, in what Judge Sir Richard Tucker later described as a reprehensible and unlawful act. Jersey police, which is not signed into but bound by the ECHR, bugged the car anyway, and with Dutch police, Soccer and Interpol monitored the transmissions. In subsequent operations, Soccer monitored Mr. Warren in Liverpool, whilst Dutch police monitored police informant Mr. Lazid in Amsterdam, and coordinated the information from various phone boxes to correlate who was speaking to whom. In the subsequent trial, it was revealed that Mr. Warren had 3 UK and 1 Jersey mobile, and had made 1,587 telephone calls in 3 weeks. From these and phone boxes across the North West and North Wales, including Wirral, Liverpool, Manchester, Llangollen and Chester, to Mr. Lazid. In 2007, Mr. Warren was arrested in St. Helens over conspiracy to smuggle drugs after a joint investigation involving Jersey police, Merseyside police, Soccer and law enforcement from Belgium, France and the Netherlands. He pleaded not guilty, and there ensued a 2-year legal argument over the legality of the information obtained by bugging Mr. Welsh's car. After agreement that there was sufficient evidence from other sources to substantiate the case, Jersey police offered him a deal for pleading guilty of an 8-year jail term and no confiscation of assets. Mr. Warren turned this down. The Metropolitan Police agreed to lend Jersey police a manned armoured prison transfer van so Mr. Warren and his associates could be transferred safely during each day of the trial. The court heard that no drugs had been imported as the Jersey contacts had failed to come up with the money. Senator Ben Sherton raised concerns that Mr. Warren's legal representation was at the cost of the Jersey taxpayer, whilst Progress Jersey, a charity which is based in Jersey, raised concerns that the entire resources of the Jersey drug squad had been targeted at Mr. Warren. Mr. Warren was found guilty on the 7th of October for conspiracy to smuggle cannabis. He was sentenced on the 3rd of December 2009 to 13 years imprisonment for his part in the plot. Jersey police also started an investigation into his wealth with the aim of confiscating his gains from drug trafficking. After initially serving his sentence at HMP Full Sutton near York, he was moved to HMP Belmarsh. On 2 occasions, he has unsuccessfully appealed to the Lieutenant Governor of Jersey, General Sir John McCall, for leave on appeal to his conviction. Once in March 2011 and secondly in September of 2011. In November 2013, Mr. Warren was ordered to pay a £198 million confiscation order or face another 10 years in jail. On the 27th of March 2014, it was reported that Mr. Warren had lost his appeal over his failure to pay the order and so would remain in prison. In 2020, Stephanie Smithwaite, a prison officer, was jailed for 2 years after having an intimate relation with Mr. Warren. In 2021, the media reported that Curtis Warren was being prepared for release after 14 years in jail, but will face strict conditions. Mr. Warren, who is now 58, will not be allowed any assets worth more than £1,000, despite allegedly having £198 million put away. He will be hit with a string of other curbs on his lifestyle, including a serious crime prevention order, including foreign travel and any use of the internet, phones and vehicles. Alison Abbott, the head of lifetime management at the National Crime Agency, said, "Many career criminals regard prison as an interruption, which rarely marks the end of their involvement in organised crime. This is why the NCA has a policy of a lifetime management. Through the NCA's lifetime management program, we use serious crime prevention orders, travel restriction orders, and financial reporting orders as an extra layer as prevention. They ensure we firmly have these individuals on our radar, especially after prison, and anything that suggests they're slipping into their old ways can be detected early on." Sources said that Mr. Warren is due to be automatically released next year. He will not have to go before a parole board because he's not serving a life sentence. Having spent the last 25 years in jail, let's hope that he gets out and lives the rest of his life as a free man. Thank you for joining us today. What are your opinions on the crimes committed by Mr. Warren? Do you believe the sentences that he got were too harsh or not harsh enough? Do you believe that anyone should be kept on a lifetime order? Please let us know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like and share. And if you're new to the channel and you want to see more Street Crime UK content, hit subscribe and press that bell button so you can join us on the next video. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.
Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more content. Today we'll be looking at another drug kingpin, Mr. Lance Kennedy, mastermind of an audacious smuggling gang that rented rural holiday homes and chartered helicopters to drop off millions of pounds of drugs from Europe. Mr. Kennedy, one of the UK's most prolific drug smugglers, operated an international cocaine trafficking ring that was built in Birkenhead but controlled from Barcelona. Mr. Kennedy, a top-tier international drug trafficker, organised helicopter drug runs from Belgium to southern England. He grew up in Wirral and recruited trusted contacts from the area, including at least one of his old St John Pleasington school friends, to build a network that supplied cocaine to gangs across Britain. His friends from home operated on the front line, greeting the drug-laden helicopters in Kent, distributing the cocaine to regional criminals and feeding cash payments back to Mr. Kennedy. Though not much is known about Mr. Kennedy's partner, it is believed that he was a proud father of 4 children. The then 32-year-old from Birkenhead built a close-knit team that supplied the substance to criminals across England and Scotland from their Wirral base. He founded that supply network on the importation of huge quantities of cocaine from the European mainland via helicopters. Mr. Kennedy, stationed in Spain, arranged for the helicopters to be loaded with the drug then flown by Dutch pilots across the Channel and into the UK. The network booked rural retreats on common flight paths in the hope that no one would notice anything unusual about the trips. The private flights would be booked between the Belgian town of Antwerp and the southern English airports, with Kennedy's associates responsible for renting selected properties on those routes. The helicopter pilots would then drop off their consignments without significantly diverting from their flight paths, disappearing from airport traffic monitors for just a few minutes at a time. 6 flights, which contained a combined total of just under 500 kilograms of cocaine, with an estimated wholesale value of £17.25 million, were linked to Kennedy. These individuals took lengthy and complex steps to mask their criminality, which was controlled from abroad. The volume of Class A drugs attributable to this group within the conspiracy period is huge, and the damage caused locally and nationally by their evil trade was unquantifiable. Pilots would land in surrounding fields and the cargo would be unloaded before the helicopter would return to its scheduled flight path. The enterprise primarily targeted the northeast drugs trade. Working from a base in Barcelona, Mr. Kennedy used encrypted mobile phones to control the gang's movements. It was from there that he also used his criminal contacts to secure hundreds of kilograms of cocaine on the European mainland, and convinced Dutch helicopter pilots to fly it across the Channel. The cocaine was so pure that his conspiracy could have been worth around £350 million. They were a multi-million pound drugs import ring with seemingly no connection to Teesside. Lance Kennedy and his mob brought vast quantities of cocaine to the UK, but when they wanted a ready target market, they looked away from their home city of Liverpool. Their focus moved out of the northwest, along the M62 and to Teesside. Mr. Kennedy became the latest northwest underworld kingpin to spot the potential to make a fortune selling cocaine in the northeast, but he's now living to regret it. The elaborate 12-member gang had neatly planned out roles to a precision that even shocked detectives all across the world. Apart from the drug peddlers and pilots, there were key individuals who took on roles ranging from the financial backer to the safety guy. The kingpin, as we now all know, was Lance Kennedy, of no fixed abode, but formerly of Birkenhead. He recruited others to work for him and oversaw the distribution of drugs across the UK once they had been imported. The second in command was Robert Ferry Stewart, who was aged 48 and of no fixed abode, but also formerly of Birkenhead. It is believed that the drug ring was a combined effort of Mr. Stewart and Mr. Kennedy, who both fled from London to Spain, and then to Thailand and finally caught in the Ukraine. We will look at the exciting rat race in a moment. Mr. Stewart, a courier for the gang, travelled the UK picking up cash and dropping off drugs. He fled while on bail for a second cocaine and cannabis plot in the northeast, which he was sentenced to for 3 years in his absence. The financial banker was Paris Newcombe, aged 48 and from Beverley Road in New Ferry, who supplied Mr. Kennedy with money and rented one of the cottages for drugs drop-offs. He had a close connection to Mr. Kennedy and supplied Alison and Connor Fraser Clark with a van to deliver drugs and pick up cash. He was subsequently jailed for 12 years and 8 months after the drug ring was busted. J. Flip Flop Robinson, aged 33 and from Beckwith Street, Birkenhead, was the transport organiser. He drove a Japanese Honda that contained concealed compartments and delivered drugs, predominantly to the northeast. He was linked to 4 of the helicopter drops and was said to have directed the ground operation of at least one of them. Flip Flop was jailed for 14 years following his arrest. The next in line was Philip Smart, aged 31 from the Somerville Close in Birkenhead. Smart had close contacts with the gang's couriers and was often referred to as the safety guy because of his concern for the drugs being transported. The minder, Connor Fraser Clark, aged 27 from Hassel Road in Rockferry, stored drugs and encrypted phones at his home and delivered drugs and picked up cash on behalf of the gang. He also oversaw the movements of his dad, John Fraser, and was arrested in North Yorkshire with £210,000 in his vehicle, A later raid on his house led to the discovery of 16 kilograms of cocaine, giving a street value of £11 million. Connor was sentenced to 11 years and 4 months in prison. Next was Connor's wife, Alison Fraser Clark, aged 25, of Elmswood Road in Tranmere. She was also arrested alongside her husband Connor. Alison went on trips for the gang with Connor and, whilst heavily pregnant with his daughter, recruited a friend to take her place. After giving birth, she quickly returned to the road on behalf of the gang. Alison had a background of mental illness and was particularly young when involved, and so she was serving a much more lenient sentence of 8 years and 8 months. Another courier was Matthew Payne, aged 35, from Sale Road in Abbeywood, London. His role came to an end when he was stopped with 60 kilograms of cannabis in his vehicle in a separate conspiracy. Mr. Payne was jailed for 11 years. The lookout and Stuart's right-hand man was David Campbell, aged 68, from Woodchurch Road in Prenton. Effectively Stuart's right-hand man, Campbell travelled the UK with him and acted as a lookout at times. Campbell was ultimately handed 12 hefty years in prison. John Fraser, aged 62 and the father of Connor, was a trusted courier for the ring. He was overseen by his son and daughter-in-law Connor and Alison Fraser Clark, respectively, and was involved in the conspiracy for 2 months. He was subsequently jailed for 12 years. Russell Ford, aged 30, from Glanagores Prestatyn, was a drugs courier and money collector. Police found £70,000 in his car on one stop, and Ford was jailed for 7 years and 8 months. Stephen Maddox, aged 32, from Plattgrove, Rockferry, was the final member of the drug ring and was jailed for 4 years for acting as the gang's money launderer. The trafficking of cocaine and heroin by Manchester and Liverpool drug lords has become well established among organised criminals. It has led to multi-million-pound rings forming as dealers work with counterparts in Middlesbrough and Stockton. The appeal to criminals is obvious: cash and lots of it. Teesside is seen as an opportunity by criminals, given the traditionally high level of Class A drug use, which provides dealers with a ready customer base. In 2016, research suggested cocaine use in parts of Stockton was higher per person than that in London, Amsterdam and Paris. Middlesbrough and Stockton are usually the places mentioned in court cases involving cross-country drug gangs, but a disturbing feature of Mr. Kennedy's case was that he would also target smaller towns. The market town of Guisborough and Thornaby were among the locations the gang was attempting to flood with Class A drugs. Cleveland police detectives are also well aware of how their patch is being eyed up by suppliers. And it was actually an operation by Cleveland police, rather than the much larger Merseyside police, which brought the Scouser Mr. Kennedy to justice, which we will explore in just a moment. There's also a link with the famous Harry Potter star. Miriam Margolyes' holiday home was used as a drop-off point. A second holiday home used by the gang was the Gun Emplacement Cottage in Dover. The picturesque retreat rented out on behalf of the BAFTA-winning actress Miriam Margolyes has a garden that overlooks the channel and crumbles into the White Cliffs of Dover. Built by the army in 1910, it is said to be the closest home to France on the English mainland. One of Mr. Kennedy's highest ranking subordinates, Paris Newcomb, booked the property for the gang in April 2016. Days before Christmas in 2015, one helicopter trip disappeared from radar after passing the market town of Faversham. It reappeared 8 minutes later near Eastling, a tiny village in the middle of the Kent countryside designated an area of outstanding natural beauty. 5 weeks earlier, Matthew Payne, a courier and organiser managed by Mr. Kennedy, had handed over £3,950 to secure Crow Cottage, a holiday home near the village, for 6 months. At the time of the helicopter flight, mobile phone masts placed Payne and associate J. Flip-Flop Robinson in the area of that secluded retreat. It is believed that Payne and Robinson had been waiting for the cargo of cocaine to land. It was later revealed that the suspicions of an estate manager had been aroused when a white bedsheet was spread out on the ground of an orchard behind the cottage of the day of the drop-off. The concerns were heightened weeks later when a dispute over the second instalment of rent led to the booking being cancelled. Mr. Payne told the owners he would send his brother-in-law to collect children's clothes and toys left at the property. Days later, the estate manager let in 2 men with Liverpool accents to pick up the items, only to watch them pull 2 holdalls from a cupboard under the stairs. The bags were so heavy the men had to drag them to their vehicle before leaving without any of the children's belongings they were supposedly sent to pick up. Mr. Kennedy may have been an international smuggler building a powerful contact book, but he was brought down by police officers left to deal with the misery his drugs were causing on the streets of England. The entire ring was busted when the arrest of couriers couple Alison and Connor unlocked a chain of evidence that led to one of Britain's biggest cocaine traffickers. The two were linked to the drugs plot by an operation that started on the streets of the northeast and ended with detectives unravelling the international conspiracy. The gang's main customer base were Teesside communities such as Stockton and Guisborough. Cleveland police launched Operation Spoonbill to probe the sources of cocaine supply. It was also around this trip that detectives uncovered a bizarre chain of events in which Kennedy's key contact, Robert Ferry Stewart, and his driver and lookout, David Campbell, repeatedly travelled the length of England. On April 10th, the pair left Wirral for the northeast, reaching Teesside at 4 PM. 1 hour later, they started a journey to a hotel in Ashford in Kent that took them 6 hours. The next morning, Mr. Stewart drove to the gun emplacement cottage to meet other gang members before staying the night in the property, then driving back to Ashford to pick up Mr. Campbell and heading back to Wirral. The following morning, the pair drove back to Dover. Under police interview, Mr. Campbell claimed he and Mr. Stewart were actually on a trip to Euro Disney in France, which they pulled out of before reaching Dover. But text uncovered by police revealed what really happened. As Mr. Stewart and Mr. Campbell were travelling to Dover, another of the conspirators, Connor Fraser Clark, texted his wife Alison from the gun emplacement cottage saying, "Things are changing again, might be tomorrow, something to do with the weather, and we need to get a hotel because he's going to get someone else staying at the cottage with Flip-Flop." Later that night, Connor texted his wife, "Just had a phone call in the cottage. The woman said she was in Australia, but 1471 the number and the area code is London." It made the ferry and Flip-Flop really paranoid. After Mr. Stewart and Mr. Campbell returned to Wirral, Connor texted Alison to say, "Stuff coming at 12:15 tomorrow." That morning, Mr. Stewart and Mr. Campbell began the long drive back to the south coast. While they were travelling, a helicopter took off from Antwerp at 11:32 AM, and at 12:17 PM, Connor texted his wife, "I've got to wait till 2 though. Ferry went home last night and I've been asked to wait until he gets back." 32 minutes later, he wrote, "Chopper is here," and referred to 160 bits. Bits is slang for a kilo. At around 2:20 PM, Mr. Stewart and Mr. Campbell arrived in Dover. By just after 3 PM, they headed back the 300 miles to Birkenhead with a car now laden with drugs. In just 3 days, the pair had travelled from Birkenhead to Stockton in the northeast, down to Kent, back to Birkenhead, down to Kent, and then back to Birkenhead. Before that crucial bust on the Fraser Clarks, the National Crime Agency, by coincidence, took out one of Kennedy's pilots. On April 21st, 2016, just days after 160 kilograms of cocaine was dropped off in Dover for Mr. Kennedy, Niels Wartenberg was arrested with passenger Ricardo Vorstenbosch as they landed at Red Hill Aerodrome. The flight, which was being tracked by the NCA and other agencies, had dropped from radar near Yalding in Kent. There, Joseph Peel had loaded his rented BMW with drugs from the helicopter before joining the M26, where he led police on a 100-mile-per-hour chase as they swooped on him. Inside his car were holdalls containing 43 kilograms of cocaine, 60 kilograms of heroin, and 30 encrypted phones. The haul was valued at £12 million. All three admitted conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Wartenberg and fellow Dutch national Vorstenbosch were each jailed for 18 years, and Peel from North Kensington in northwest London for 16 years. That drop's connection with Kennedy's operation is unclear, but Peel, when arrested, was found with a slip of paper in his pocket on which the phone number of Russell Ford, who was one of Kennedy's drug couriers and cash collectors, was on it. The group used sophistication to adapt vehicles to conceal drugs. Honda Accords were the vehicle of choice. When Russell Ford was stopped in an Audi A6 at the Tees Barrage, he had a hidden compartment in his car operated by the cigarette lighter, and a stash of cash was found. In September 2016, detectives identified the Fraser Clarks as potential drug couriers and monitored them on a trip to Newcastle before stopping them on the A19 in North Yorkshire. Inside their vehicle, one of many used by the gang that had secret compartments built into them, was £210,000. A subsequent raid on their Wirral home led to the discovery of 16 kilograms of high purity cocaine hidden under a bed. The drugs were given a street value of £11 million, but perhaps of more value to the detectives were the mobile phones they seized from the husband and wife team. After cracking those mobiles, officers gained access to messages detailing gang member movements, and the bust opened the door to the gang's wider movement, with messages between key members mentioning helicopters and meetings in the Kent countryside. Cleveland police liaised with the UK's air traffic control. Detectives then matched the time and locations of those meetings with potential suspicious private helicopter flights scheduled overhead, piecing together the elaborate conspiracy. However, by this time Lance Kennedy had already escaped to Thailand, where he teamed up with his co-conspirator Robbie Stewart, who also fled to Thailand due to an unrelated drug charge. It is believed that the true scale of the operation may have been far greater, with detectives believing that Kennedy may have been behind more than 6 helicopter drug flights ultimately being pinned on him. Little is known about what they did after meeting in Thailand, but in February of 2018 they emerged in Eastern Europe. Armed border patrols captured them attempting a nighttime river crossing from Moldova into the Ukraine. Dramatic footage obtained by the Echo showed them being marched at gunpoint after their capture by a team from the Belhorod-Dnipropetrovsk border unit. The Ukrainian authorities also released pictures showing the pair being detained by gun-wielding troops in a field and sitting handcuffed against a wall lined with rugs. Mr. Kennedy, wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with Boss, watched via video link from Strangeways as he was jailed for 18 years and 4 months after admitting conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Lance Kennedy received one of the longest jail sentences ever handed to a Merseyside drugs crook who admitted his crime after masterminding a plot that saw half a ton of Class A drug flown into England. Had he not pleaded guilty, a move that saw his sentence reduced by 1/3, Judge Sophie McCone told him that he would have been jailed for 28 years. Despite his guilty plea, the sentence he received is far longer than those handed out to most of Merseyside's most notorious drug smugglers, including Curtis Warren and the Fitzgibbon brothers, Ian and Jason. Such was the case against Mr. Kennedy, where his barrister was simply left to argue why the starting point of his sentence should not be 30 years or above. Asking Judge McCone to simply be as merciful as possible, his argument centered on how only a select few drug smugglers linked to the importation of extraordinary amounts of Class A drugs have been given 30 years or more. That group includes Mehmet Bebasin, the London-based smuggler who plotted to import 40 tons of cocaine with Paul Taylor from the Vauxhall area of Liverpool. Mr. Taylor of Paul Orr Court received 22 years for his role in the plot. While other Merseyside drug dealers have received longer sentences than Mr. Kennedy, they were not given a reduction for a guilty plea because they fought for the case against them. To put into context Mr. Kennedy's 28-year term, had he lost the trial, it would have been on par with that handed to West Derby plotter Eddie Jarvis. Mr. Jarvis used his immense criminal wealth to buy a 7-bedroom mansion in West Derby, a luxury Spanish villa, and expensive jewellery before being convicted in 2005 for masterminding a plan to traffic 593 kilograms of cocaine, which was foiled after the drugs were seized from a yacht on the island of Margarita, off the coast of Venezuela. Following the conclusion of the sentencing, Cleveland Police Detective Sergeant John Fitzpatrick, who led on Operation Spoonbill, said this was a complex inquiry and the sentences reflect the scale of the conspiracy which was uncovered by our organised crime unit. Mr. Kennedy was held in Monster Mansion over fears Underworld contacts would spring him from custody. Those Underworld connections were believed to be so significant that when he was brought back to the UK to face justice, he was remanded in HMP Frankland. The high security jail dubbed Monster Mansion holds some of the nation's most notorious and dangerous murderers, rapists and terrorists. Mr. Kennedy was sent there because detectives genuinely believed his criminal contacts were capable of a serious attempt to spring him from custody. The lifestyle that he led and the life and crimes that were committed by Mr. Kennedy and his helicopter gang will never be forgotten about in the UK criminal underworld.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Please like, share and subscribe for more exciting content. Today we'll be looking at the life of Mr. Robert Dawes, who was described by the National Crime Agency, or NCA, as one of the most influential and feared organised criminals in Europe. The 49-year-old hailed from Sutton in Ashfield, Nottinghamshire, and his network was said to span Europe, South America, the Middle East and Asia, which enabled him to orchestrate the movements of huge amounts of Class A drugs and money using corruption, violence and intimidation to exert control, while his associates are suspected of shootings and murders in the UK and abroad. Mr. Dawes was accused of buying large amounts of drugs from Italy's 'Ndrangheta mafia, which is thought to run much of Europe's cocaine trade from Calabria. In short, he was a global big fish who brokered deals with the Italian mafia and the Colombian cartels. His crime group was often accused of drug trafficking and money laundering. Around 80,000 members of his organisation were arrested as a result of the investigation. It was the most significant organised criminal cabal in Europe, with a network that literally spanned the globe. At the centre of all of it was Mr. Dawes, a transnational poly-drug trafficker with contacts in high places and corrupt port officials in his pocket all around the world. That was according to Mr. Rob Hickenbottom, who led the investigation by the UK National Crime Agency into Mr. Dawes. Mastermind Mr. Robert Dawes is a dad of three whose crime-stained tentacles spread across Europe and as far as Dubai. From his days as a young criminal on a Nottingham council estate, he became one of Europe's top 10 most wanted gangsters. He got his first conviction at 11 and was jailed aged 20 and again at age 22 for robbery. Inside prison, Mr. Dawes corrupted officers into drug smuggling and ended up creating a ring that netted £500,000 after his second release from prison in 1997. Still on his mid-20s, Mr. Dawes teamed up with mates who controlled Nottingham's notorious Bestwood estate, and from there he made connections with major league drug mobs in Holland and Spain. By 2001, Mr. Dawes was dispatching 50 to 100 kilograms of drugs every week, as well as arming gangs in Manchester, Liverpool, Nottingham and London. In a bid to escape Nottinghamshire police, Dawes bought a villa in sunny Benalmadena worth £1 million, but still wore tracksuits and trainers. His aliases ranged from Tracky, Frankie, the Derbyman, This One and The Voice. When his brother John was arrested and jailed in 2005, at least £8.5 million was sent to Frankie in Spain. Meanwhile, he was laundering cash across the globe and organising larger shipments of cocaine and heroin, before he was caught by French authorities. Prior to emigrating to Spain, his name has cropped up in investigations from Scotland to London, where he is known to have associated with some of the UK's most notorious crime syndicates, including the London-based Addams family. Investigations were launched in 2007 into Mr. Dawes, and his alleged links to the Italian mafia and South American cartels. He was also being investigated in the Netherlands over a wave of murders there in 2014 and 2015, allegedly aimed at taking control of the cocaine trafficking in several European countries. From his base in Al-Dulisa, Dawes is suspected of importing furniture from China and fruit containers from South America, which he would fill with large quantities of cocaine. His cartel also shipped heroin from Turkey and Afghanistan to Britain. Spanish police said that Dawes mainly used shipping containers to move the drugs, but also leisure boats and commercial flights, such as the Air France flight. Despite the fact that Mr. Dawes had been based overseas for many years, His offending has continued to have an impact on communities in the UK, particularly in Nottingham and the East Midlands. Mr. Dawes was prepared to use extreme levels of violence in order to further his reputation and take retribution against those who crossed him. Members or associates of his criminal group are known to have been involved in intimidation, shootings and murders. By 2007, Mr. Dawes was flitting between Spain and Dubai, where he laundered cash, built a £10 million property portfolio, and spent time with a Chinese mistress. Spanish police eventually charged him, but the case collapsed in 2012. Mr. Dawes began organising yet larger shipments of cocaine and heroin, working in thousands of kilos rather than hundreds. Mr. Dawes' crime syndicate mainly capitalised on corruption in poor South American states to traffic drugs and flood lucrative markets like Europe and France with Class A drugs. Venezuela is one of the many examples of nations suffering from corruption due to cocaine trafficking routes to Europe. The former Dutch colony of Suriname was long ruled by Desi Bouterse, first as a dictator and then as an elected president. He allegedly had contact with Pablo Escobar and did arms for drugs deals with the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or the FARC, in the 1990s. In 1999, Bouterse was convicted in absentia as the mastermind behind a shipment of cocaine to Netherlands. It is clear that there are links between the state and the underworld in Suriname, mentioned former Surinamese diplomat and political analyst Martin Schalwijk. Since then, cocaine routes to Europe have expanded around the region, and so has the corruption. Ecuador, and especially the port of Guayaquil, is now one of the main dispatch points to Europe. Here, drug trafficking allegations have reached the highest levels of the state. In the previous administration of Rafael Correa, there were narco scandals involving government ministers, presidential allies, and even the president himself. Underworld sources in Ecuador, who spoke on condition of anonymity, described how police, armed forces, judges, prosecutors, public registrars, mayors, governors, and even figures in the national government are all on the payroll of cocaine traffickers. If you're not corrupt, then they will corrupt you, said one, who has first-hand knowledge of drug trafficking in the Colombia border region. Another major dispatch point to Europe to emerge over the last decade is the Dominican Republic, a long-time transit route to the United States and Europe. Once again, the increase in trafficking through the country has deepened already high levels of corruption. In the Dominican Republic, decades of corruption have made politics a partner of drug trafficking, and today, this has reached exorbitant levels. Drug trafficking corrupts politicians beginning at the local level, where sources say candidates for municipal elections are routinely bankrolled by traffickers, and their influence rises to the national level, where former Dominican Republic President Danilo Medina has faced scrutiny over his alleged links to the wife of one of the island's most notorious cocaine traffickers, Cesar Emilio Peralta, alias El Abusador. Factions of the Dominican security forces, meanwhile, have crossed the line from corruption to criminal actors, participating in everything from murder for hire to international drug trafficking, according to Dominican prosecutors. The former director of the country's anti-narcotics police was even convicted of stealing nearly a ton of cocaine. When Mr. Robert Dawes was planning a major cocaine shipment in 2013, he turned to a trafficking network formed from within Venezuela itself, the Cartel of the Suns. The Air France case shined light on perhaps the starkest example of the corrosive power of cocaine trade corruption in Venezuela. The Cartel of the Suns is a loose-knit network of trafficking cells embedded in the upper reaches of the Venezuelan security forces and government. The involvement of Venezuelan security forces in the cocaine trade dates back as far back as the early 1990s. But it was the convergence of Mr. Hugo Chavez coming to power with a boom in trafficking through Venezuela to Europe that would shape the fate of the country. This was a process that did not happen overnight, but gradually. It developed more with the arrival of Mr. Chavez, as he allowed the military to get involved in drug trafficking in exchange for its loyalty. For Mr. Chavez, it was a strategic decision to turn a blind eye to cocaine trafficking. Mr. Chavez's tolerance of cocaine trafficking secured the loyalty of the corrupt security forces leadership. a priority for the president after the 2002 attempted coup against him. It also helped support another ally, the guerrillas in the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, which are also known by the acronym FARC. Mr. Chavez supported the FARC out of ideological sympathy and as a bulwark against his geopolitical enemies, Colombia and the United States mainly. And the FARC were heavily involved in the cocaine trade all along the Venezuela-Colombia border. Mr. Chavez could not, or would not, contain the corruption that he had permitted. The Bolivarian National Guard and other branches of Venezuela's military went from allowing trafficking to purchasing, storing, transporting and selling cocaine, which they sourced directly from the FARC. They sold weapons for drugs, and it was an exchange. Many FARC weapons had the insignias of Venezuelan Bolivarian Republic. By the time Mr. Chavez died in March 2013, the cocaine cancer had fully metastasized, eating away at the legitimacy of his Bolivarian revolution. The cabal of Chavista leaders that replaced him, including numerous military and political leaders, now accused of drug trafficking. Among them is not only Chavez's hand-picked successor, Mr. Nicolas Maduro, but also government ministers, regional governors, and senior security and intelligence officials. It was shortly after Mr. Chavez's death when Robert Dawes dispatched his emissaries to meet with a British national known as Charlie Brown, who was his upstream connection with the Cartel of the Suns network. Together, they made the arrangements for the Air France shipment, which we will look at in greater detail in a bit. Criminals like Mr. Dawes capitalized these dismal situations in these South American and African nations to further their highly lucrative drug trafficking business. They were both welcomed in the nations where the journey of the drug started, like Venezuela, and even in destination countries like France and the UK, where corruption was pretty ubiquitous too. Like the Cartel of the Suns, the story of Mr. Thierry, a top European anti-narcotics official accused of helping to traffic drugs, is an extreme case. But in Europe, as in Latin America, it is still just one of part of a much bigger picture. Corruption in Europe might not be as widespread as in Latin America, but its core elements remain the same: structural and strategically planned. According to Europol, cocaine trafficking related corruption is on the rise. The first European mafias to capitalise on large-scale cocaine trafficking, the Galicians and the Italian mafia, already worked in spaces where they were able to penetrate and corrupt the state. But their participation in the cocaine trade took corruption to new levels. Armed with cocaine money, the Galicians infiltrated government institutions, the legal economy and the politics at an unprecedented level. In Italy, cocaine riches have helped organised crime continue to penetrate the state, even as anti-corruption measures have broken up the old ways of working. In December 2019, Italian military police arrested more than 300 people on suspicion of membership of the 'Ndrangheta, the second biggest mafia bust in Italy's history. Suspects included politicians, lawyers, accountants, a local police chief, and a former member of the Italian parliament, within ex-Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia party. The level of infiltration and control the 'Ndrangheta have is worrying and is going to the next level. We're talking about people who are highly educated, white collar. When organised crime from the Balkans moved to the cocaine trade, the region's already weak and corrupt institutions proved easily corrupted. There have been numerous cases linking Balkan politicians and police to drug trafficking, especially in Serbia. In 2009, the head of the Serbian police, Ivica Dačić, faced corruption accusations after he was twice captured on camera meeting with drug lord Rodo Ejub Radlovic. Dačić was never charged. He managed to survive the scandal, and he is now the Serbian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Nonetheless, in most cases, the biggest threat of corruption comes from points where cocaine enters Europe. Here, people on the ground, such as port workers or customs officials, can make the difference between success and a seizure. In the port of Rotterdam, for example, several customs officers have been arrested for participating in drug trafficking, including one officer who earns millions waving through contaminated containers before he was arrested and sentenced to 14 years in prison in 2017. Europe's cocaine corridors are currently evolving and expanding, All of its 20 busiest container ports have seen cocaine seizures of over 100 kilos in the past 3 years. Meanwhile, cocaine routes are opening up all around Latin America, from the ports of the southern cone countries to the mouth of the Amazon River. Wherever these new routes go, the cancer of corruption follows. The future of the cocaine trade may well lie in the hands of these corruption networks, which criminals like Mr. Dawes cleverly utilise for personal gains. Let us look at the Venezuelan organisation, Cartel of the Suns, that fueled the growth of petty thief Mr. Dawes into an international drug kingpin. The Cartel of the Suns, known as Cartel de los Soles in Spanish, was supposedly headed by high-ranking members of the armed forces of Venezuela, who were involved in international drug trading. This phenomenon began when Colombian drugs began to enter Venezuela from corrupt border units, and the rot moved its way up the ranks. Reports that members of the Venezuelan military were involved in drug trafficking began in the 1990s, though it was limited to taking payments and ignoring drug traffickers. It was alleged that officers of Mr. Hugo Chávez's revolutionary Bolivarian movement that planned the 1992 Venezuelan coup d'etat attempts had created a group that participated in drug trafficking that was known as the Cartel Bolivariano, or Bolivarian Cartel. Following the 1992 coup attempts, the Venezuelan officers may have sought to take over the government, since there was money to be made from corruption, particularly in drugs. In 1993, the term Cartel of the Suns was first used when allegations of 2 National Guard generals of the Anti-Drug National Command, Mr. Ramon Guillen Davila and Mr. Orlando Hernandez Villegas, were investigated for drug trafficking crimes. The term came from the general emblems that looked like the suns on their uniforms. The Cartel of the Suns name returned in 2004 thanks to the reporter and city council member, Mr. Mauro Marcano. Shortly before he was murdered, Mr. Marcano alleged that Mr. Alexis Manero, head of the National Guard and the Dirección General de Inteligencia Militar, was involved in drug trafficking. The Venezuelan government under Mr. Hugo Chávez expanded corruption to unprecedented levels in an already corrupt military. Mr. Chávez gave military officials millions of dollars for social programs that allegedly disappeared, also giving legal immunity to drug trafficking officials to maintain power and loyalty. When Mr. Chávez ousted the United States Drug Enforcement Administration in 2005, Venezuela became a more attractive route for drug trade. According to Colombian intelligence, an arrested drug vigilante stated that senior figures in President Hugo Chávez's security forced them to arrange drug shipments through Venezuela. It's been alleged that the National Guard had worked with the FARC with drug trading. British officials alleged the planes from Colombia would also be sheltered by Venezuelan Air Force bases. Allegedly, lower-ranking National Guardsmen compete for positions at border checkpoints so they can be paid bribes for illicit trade, though a large portion of bribes go to their superiors, supposedly. The corrupt officials of the Cartel of the Sun trafficked drugs from Colombia to Venezuela where they are shipped internationally. President of Venezuela Nicolas Maduro has personally promoted individuals accused of drug trafficking to high positions of the Venezuelan government. In May 2018, he was said to have received drug trafficking profits from Mr. Diosdado Cabello, and in January 2015, the former security chief of both Mr. Hugo Chávez and Mr. Diosdado Cabello, Mr. Limzy Salazar, made accusations that Cabello was head of the Cartel of the Suns. Mr. Salazar was placed in witness protection, fleeing to the United States with assistance of the Drug Enforcement Administration's Special Operations Division. After cooperating with the administration and providing possible details on Cabello's involvement with the international drug trade, Mr. Salazar stated that he saw Mr. Cabello give orders on transporting tons of cocaine. The shipments of drugs were reportedly sent from the FARC in Colombia to the United States and Europe. With the possible assistance of Cuba, the alleged international drug operation had possibly involved other senior members of Venezuela's government as well, such as Mr. Tarek El Esemi and Mr. Jose David Cabello. Mr. Diosdado's brother, Mr. Hugo Carvajal, is allegedly one of the leaders of the Cartel of the Suns. On July 22, 2014, Mr. Hugo Carvajal former head of the Venezuelan military intelligence, was detained in Aruba. Despite having been admitted on a diplomatic passport and being named Consul General to Aruba in January, the arrest was carried out following a formal request by the US government which accuses Mr. Carvajal of ties to drug trafficking and to the FARC guerrilla group. On the 27th of July 2014, Mr. Carvajal was released after authorities decided that he had diplomatic immunity, but was also considered persona non grata, otherwise defined as an unacceptable or unwelcome person. On March of 2020, after a strategic $10 million bounty imposed on Mr. Hugo Carvajal and other Venezuelan narco-terrorists, he decided to surrender to the US, possibly to cut a deal with information on bigger supposedly corrupt government officials and narco-terrorists that are affiliated with Mr. Maduro's government, not to mention Mr. Maduro himself has a $15 million bounty. Mr. Yzenki Lamas, former pilot to First Lady Celia Flores, was extradited to the United States from Colombia, having allegedly provided air traffic codes to allow planes carrying cocaine to impersonate commercial flights. Venezuelan President Mr. Nicolas Maduro reportedly asked Colombian Defense Minister Mr. Luis Carlos Villegas Echeverri to reject the request for extradition. Mr. Lamas has been linked to hundreds of flights operated in Venezuela carrying drugs. Months later, on September 10, 2013, 31 suitcases filled with cocaine arrived at the Caracas Simón Bolívar International Airport of Maquita, Venezuela. The suitcases were brought in through a worker's entrance to avoid scanners and baggage checks. They had stickers with counterfeit barcodes and were accepted by the Air France luggage system despite not belonging to any travellers. The 31 suitcases containing 1.3 tons of cocaine, with a street value of 240 million euros, was placed on an Air France flight, astonishing the Charles de Gaulle airport authorities, as it was the largest seizure of cocaine recorded in mainland France. Reception of the cocaine in France was then had to be handled by one of France's biggest marijuana traffickers, the incarcerated Mr. Sofiane Hambli, according to the testimony of Hambli himself. However, unknown to Mr. Dawes and his Venezuelan partners, the operation was compromised. British undercover operatives in Venezuela had warned the French of an impending shipment using an Air France flight, and the French had set up controlled handover operations. According to sources familiar with the investigation, Mr. Hambli was a collaborator with a French police unit, the Central Office for the Suppression of Illicit Drug Trafficking. Police deliberately let some of the shipment through so they could follow a lorry load of drugs to the French-German border, where they arrested 5 people. The investigation eventually led to Mr. Dawes. The seizure made international headlines, and Venezuela came under pressure to respond. A government minister admitted that suitcases had gone through security scanners that had clearly shown the presence of drugs. Authorities initially made 27 arrests, including airport workers, low-ranking members of the GNB, which is responsible for security at Venezuela's airports, and Mr. Ernesto Mora Carvajal, the GNB lieutenant colonel, and Mr. Hugo Carvajal's nephew, who headed the airport security. 7 airport workers and 3 GNB officials later received sentences of between 10 and 22 years in prison. Mr. Mora Carvajal, however, was quickly declared innocent and released. On the 15th of February 2014, a commander for the Venezuelan National Guard was stopped while driving to Valencia with his family and was arrested for having 554 kilos of cocaine in his possession. On the 11th of November 2015, DEA agents arrested in Haiti 2 relatives of Miss Celia Flores, the then First Lady of Venezuela, while trying to move 800 kilograms of cocaine from Venezuela to the United States. There was little doubt that the true masterminds would be found much higher up, and in 2020 the US Department of Justice accused President Maduro, Mr. Hugo Carvajal, and Mr. Diosdado Cabello of involvement in the case. Among the evidence were communications and intercepts with Mr. Maduro and Mr. Carvajal, and Mr. Cabello shortly after the seizure said that they should not have used the Maquita airport for drug trafficking and should stick to established trafficking routes. Mr. Dawes himself was arrested at his large villa on the Costa del Sol in 2015 and extradited to France. He denied the charges, saying he had no involvement in the crime. The case exposed how the key to cocaine trafficking today is the extreme violence with which the trade has become synonymous. And it showed the cancerous effect of the cocaine trade, which corrupts states wherever it spreads, eroding capacity, and in the more extreme cases, democracy altogether. With trafficking to Europe booming, the cocaine trade is now spreading the cancer of corruption further and quicker than ever before, on both sides of the Atlantic. Drug traffickers have two main weapons at their disposal. Captured in Mr. Pablo Escobar's infamous offer to those whose cooperation he sought, plomo o plata, silver or lead. Since Mr. Escobar's time, it is plomo that has been most connected to the cocaine trade, from the Medellin cartel blowing up airlines to Mexican cartels hanging bodies from bridges or tossing severed heads on the dance floors. Europe has not had to endure the same level of bloodshed as Latin America, but it too has seen extreme violence resulting from the cocaine trade. The cocaine trade is to blame for the rising gun crime in Britain. Our firearms cases and firearms seizures are 99% linked to the drugs war. Police sources in Spain paint a similar picture, blaming drug trade disputes for the bulk of the country's murders. Even the Netherlands, which has one of the lowest homicide rates in Europe, has seen a severed head left as a narco message, and innocent bystanders gunned down in drug war disputes. A family member and lawyer of a witness in a major cocaine trafficking case were murdered. The latest discovery in July 2020 was of an underworld prison with multiple cells and a torture room that was set up by a cocaine trafficking group. However, while today's drug traffickings remain more than willing to use extreme violence, they also understand that this is what has led to the downfall of many of their predecessors. Violence, particularly extreme violence, creates headlines and draws the attention of authorities. Instead, plata is the weapon of choice today for transnational organised crime. Corruption from drug trafficking penetrates the state at all levels, from police patrolmen to presidents, and it targets all branches of the state, the judicial, legislative, executive, and the security forces. It has to put justice up for sale in many Latin American countries, and seen police and military not only facilitate but participate in drug trafficking and even murder, and it has placed certain governments at the service of organised crime, at local and even national levels. Returning back to Mr. Dawes, he was secretly recorded bragging about his involvement in the shipping to a member of a Colombian drugs cartel during a meeting in Madrid hotel. He was arrested after being taped boasting, "You know the big one in Paris, in all the luggage, that was mine." Mr. Dawes was arrested in 2015 when officers swooped on his mansion in Benalmádena, a town in the Costa del Sol in Spain, where they found guns, cash and encrypted phones. Mr. Dawes was accused of buying large amounts of drugs from Italy's 'Ndrangheta mafia, which is thought to run much of Europe's cocaine trade from Calabria. He was extradited to France shortly after his arrest, and tried by 5 judges who ordered him and 4 accomplices to pay a £27 million fine. The Costa del Sol was known as a hideaway for British criminals in the past, especially in the late 1970s and 80s, when there were no extradition agreements with Britain. Guns, cash and encrypted mobile phones were seized from the property, and he was extradited back to France to face trial. In his final statement at the Paris court hearing on Friday, Mr. Dawes said, "I continue to claim my innocence." Mr. Dawes had hoped to get the recording of him dismissed on legal grounds, but a document submitted by his defence team in support of that claim turned out to be a forgery. He told the court his claims in the video were just a made-up story, intended to provoke the police into arresting him so he could prove his innocence. In June 2008, another court was told that Mr. Dawes was one of 3 drug generals who had been at the head of a multi-million-pound empire in Nottinghamshire. Before the verdict, Mr. Dawes was laughing and smiling, even miming hanging himself to his lawyer as he entered the dock. But he was convicted of 8 charges: unauthorised importation of drugs by an organised gang, trafficking, smuggling and importation by an organised gang of prohibited products, unauthorised transport of narcotic drugs, unauthorised offer or sale of narcotic drugs, unauthorised acquisition of narcotic drugs, participation in a group committing criminal acts for the preparation of a crime, and participation in a group committing criminal acts for the preparation of an offence. He was acquitted of unauthorised possession of narcotic drugs. In July 2020, judges told him that he would have to serve at least 15 years of his 22-year sentence. Of 2 other Britons on trial, Mr. Nathan Wheat was convicted of 6 charges and jailed for 13 years, while Mr. Kane Price was acquitted. 3 Italians were also convicted. Finally, bringing Mr. Dawes to justice had been an international effort of numerous countries working hand in hand in investigations. It also had a dramatic impact in dismantling Mr. Dawes' criminal empire and protecting the public from the drugs and violence they dealt in. Mr. Dawes was suspected of being involved in the 2002 murder of a teacher in the Netherlands, money laundering in the United Arab Emirates and Switzerland, and dealings with Colombian drug cartels. Mr. Dawes is also believed to have shipped cocaine hidden inside commercial shipping containers, bringing furniture from China and fruit from South America, as well as heroin from Turkey and Afghanistan for delivery to the UK. He also used private boats and cars. Mr. Robert Dawes is to be extradited from a Paris jail where he is serving 22 years for cocaine smuggling, to the Netherlands in connection with a murder 18 years ago. Now, the Public Prosecution Service in Northern Netherlands has confirmed that Mr. Dawes is regarded as a suspect in the murder of Gerard Meesters in 2002 in his home in Groningen, a city in the northern Netherlands. An extradition request was filed for Mr. Dawes from Paris to the Netherlands and granted in a court in Paris in August. 2 detectives have been investigating at home and abroad for the past 2 years. An interrogation of Mr. Robert Dawes was part of the investigation. It is believed that Gerard Meesters, an innocent schoolteacher, was shot in 2002 for refusing to reveal the whereabouts of his sister, who had disappeared after a shipment of cannabis went missing. If Mr. Dawes is prosecuted and convicted in the Netherlands for the murder of Gerard Meesters, the public prosecutor assumes that he must first serve his French sentence before going to the Netherlands to serve a Dutch sentence, but only if he is prosecuted and convicted. Mr. Dawes is also suspected of being the boss of the impenetrable international telecommunications network used by the Mexican drug lords, despite currently being held behind bars in France. Robert Dawes is the suspected mastermind behind the international encrypted network. The Nottingham-born trafficker stopped his associates mentioning his real name on phone calls, so many in the drug supply chain simply knew him as the Voice. Mr. Dawes, worth £50 million or more, supplies the likes of the mafia and Mexican drug cartels with the handsets fitted with encrypted SIM cards. If the BlackBerry handset falls into the wrong hands, the gang can simply send a kill code text which destroys anything stored on the device. The encryption technology, believed by the National Crime Agency to have been written by a Ukrainian tech genius, used to be supplied by a now dissolved UK registered company, Number 1 Business Communication. Usually organised criminals download encrypted phone apps or buy burner phones, but this is the first detailed case of a UK crime group controlling an entire network. These were major players in control of a phone network which could not be penetrated. Mr. Dawes has always been very switched on with his comms, but once he had control of his secret end-to-end encryption, it became more difficult. He would not deal with anyone on anything sensitive unless they were on this network. It was also the first time we had seen a whole organised crime group operating in a number of countries, including the UK, using the same network like this. Number 1 Business Communication was registered in the United Kingdom in 2011 by Mr. Roy Livings, an associate of Mr. Dawes, who was later jailed for importing 167 kilos of cocaine into Portugal. Another founding director, Israeli Mr. Elamir Gampel, was jailed for laundering €30 million of Colombian drug cartel money through a UK firm. To get around Mr. Dawes' impenetrable phone system, investigators resorted to an old-fashioned surveillance, bugging a hotel room in Madrid where he met with a Colombian cartel representative. The 49-year-old was arrested in his villa on the Costa del Sol in 2015, and investigators seized the encrypted phones. But by the time they examined them, the incriminating data had all been erased. Even behind bars, cops believe that Mr. Dawes is giving orders to his network through making calls on illicit mobile phones. The encrypted network is allowed to operate, as it's not easy to prove it's only being used by criminals. Authorities would have to find the servers to take down the network, but this would be extremely difficult since they're based in a number of countries. Number 1 Business Communication has been dissolved in the UK, but still has sales outlets in 24 countries. A shop in Manchester was the only place in the UK selling the encrypted phone and SIM package, costing £1,300 for a 6-month contract. There are people who argue it's their right to have encryption, but at this level we rarely find those kinds of comms are used for legitimate business reasons. This telecommunications network was favoured by the likes of El Chapo and many other drug lords all across the globe. The handsets are also used by the mafia and cartels, made infamous by caged Mexican crime boss Mr. Joaquin Guzman, nicknamed El Chapo. All users have an encrypted SIM card in an adapted BlackBerry handset. Dawes made it clear that his name should not be mentioned in phone calls, so associates referred to him as the Voice. Many in the drug supply chain never knew his real identity. Mr. Dawes worked closely with a Dutch crime group led by Mr. Gwente Martha, whose right-hand man Mr. Nahib Baobao was a director of No. 1 Business Communications Belgium Limited. However, Mr. Baobao and Mr. Martha were gunned down in 2012 and 2014 respectively. The gangland slaying sparked more than 20 tit-for-tat assassinations across Europe, including cases of mistaken identity. Tell us what you think about Mr. Dawes and his life, and what you think about encryption, and what levels the public should have access to in the comments down below.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and a share, and leave any thoughts or suggestions you have in the comments section. We love to read through them all. And if you're new but enjoy UK true crime content, then subscribe to see when our newest video releases. And as always, stay safe.
Hello and welcome to the Street Crime UK YouTube channel. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Today we look at how a police investigation has resulted in the dismantling of a complex drugs ring which has distributed heroin and cocaine across Sussex, South East London and Kent. It led to convictions of 16 people, including 2 ringleaders who were convicted and sentenced at Hove Crown Court to life imprisonment for conspiracy to murder. Police said Leo Ellis from Hastings and his associate Jason Caswell acted as main drug dealers supplying cocaine and, in Mr. Ellis's case, heroin too, across East Sussex and Kent. They ran a drugs ring supplying the area with illegal substances from their suppliers. However, the work of Sussex police detectives identified this ring and the locations from where they ran their illegal operation. In a succession of major raids and arrests, officers seized a large amount of drugs and cash over several months in 2015 and 2016. Because of the seizures, by February 2016, Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell owed their dealers in excess of £850,000. Police said their inability to repay the debts was then worsened by further seizures of £92,000 cash, and 2 kilos of cocaine were made within 3 days that month. In total, £1.4 million in Class A drugs and £100,000 cash were seized by police officers working closely with the National Crime Agency. Detectives continued their surveillance on them as Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell came under increasing pressure to compensate their suppliers for the seizures. They used mobile phones to send emails discussing what had happened and what they were going to do about it. Police said detailed examination of mobile phones identified vitally important messages between Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell in which they talk about arranging the murders. Records of conversations recorded by police at Mr. Ellis's address feature one in which he boasted of having acquired guns and ammunition from Eastern Europe. In another recording, he discussed with Mr. Caswell plans to recruit someone to carry out the killings. Detectives were able to work out that Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell had decided to eliminate their debts by murdering the people they owed money to, rather than pay back the £1.4 million in drugs and cash the police had seized. Police said Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell planned together, and Mr. Ellis arranged for another associate, Jamie Winchester, to supply a weapon, a TEC-9 style 9mm automatic submachine gun pistol with a silencer and ammunition. A surveillance photo captured Mr. Winchester cycling away from a drop-off point in Cinque Ports Way, Hastings, having supplied the gun which had been in a bag strapped to his back on March 1st, 2016. Police officers were able to track their movements, and the gun and ammunition were seized before any murders could take place. After a complex surveillance operation, 2 arrests were made of Anthony Hearn and a woman who was not charged with any offences in Hastings town centre on the afternoon on March 1st, 2016, and the weapon and ammunition was seized in the footwell of their car in Wellington Square. It was in a bag which contained a silencer and 16 rounds of ammunition, police said. The gun was a fully working machine pistol capable of firing up to 900 rounds per minute. After extensive inquiries, officers raided Mr. Winchester's home in Sandy Close, St. Leonard's in December 2016 and arrested him. Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell faced a 10-week trial together with 3 associates, Jamie Winchester, John Gardner and Simon Grant. Police said Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell pleaded not guilty to conspiracy to murder and drugs supply offences. Mr. Caswell also pleaded not guilty to money laundering and conspiracy to supply cocaine. Mr. Winchester pleaded not guilty to supplying the gun and ammunition. John Gardner pleaded not guilty to drug supply offences. Simon Grant pleaded not guilty to drug supply and money laundering offences. Leo Allen Ellis, 24, unemployed, of Mountbatten Close, Hastings, was found guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years for conspiracy to murder 2 people. He was also given 10 years for supplying a firearm, 14 years for each of the 3 counts of conspiracy to supply heroin, 8 years for 1 count of conspiracy to supply cocaine, and another 2 years for a second of the same offence, and a further 16 years for another offence of conspiracy to supply cocaine, 2 years for money laundering. Mr. Ellis pleaded guilty to the money laundering and cocaine offences before the trial. Jason Caswell, 41, a road worker of Credon Walk, London, was found guilty and was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years for conspiracy to murder 2 men. He was also sentenced to 14 years and 16 years for 2 counts of conspiracy to supply cocaine and 3 years for money laundering. Detective Chief Inspector Andy Bennett of the Sussex Police Organised Crime Unit said, "This operation has been a significant and extremely complex investigation into drug dealing and money laundering by Mr. Ellis in Sussex and Mr. Caswell in Kent. Both Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell had autonomy over the drug supply in their home areas and both became equally indebted to their suppliers. Our interventions had a major impact on their criminality and placed a significant pressure on their mounting debts. They believed their only way out of this situation was to plan on killing their suppliers, clearly showing the extreme and drastic action those in the drugs world are willing to take." Leo Ellis's dwindling position within the drugs ring became clear to us as we learned from our investigation of how his huge debts and inability or unwillingness to repay them despite pressure to do so. However, we had the group under surveillance and their intentions were confirmed by emails that we were able to access and by covert recordings of conversations at Mr. Ellis's home. This has been a major operation for my team, working with those close cooperation and support of the National Crime Agency throughout, for which we are extremely grateful. It shows the determination of law enforcement at both national and force level to work successfully together in order to effectively tackle organised crime to protect the public from dangerous criminals such as these men. The operation was the culminating phase of a major inquiry and another example of the way in which, working with our law enforcement partners, we are constantly attacking organised crime and frustrating its efforts to become embedded in our communities. The devastating effect on the drugs misuse can have a much wider impact than simply on the person who takes them. It can corrode the quality of life for local communities and affect the health of those who are drawn into it. The fully working submachine gun we recovered was capable of firing up to 900 rounds per minute and was quite obviously a lethal weapon. Thankfully, this has now been taken off our streets. It is vital that we continue to receive support from our communities so we can effectively tackle crime and take weapons like this off our streets for good. David Renders of the National Crime Agency said those sentenced were dangerous drug traffickers intent on committing horrendous crimes. With access to an automated weapon, they posed a significant danger to ordinary members of the public, let alone their enemies. NCA officers worked in close collaboration with their colleagues in Sussex Police during this investigation, sharing resources and intelligence and providing specialist support to the operation. Through partners such as this one, we and our law enforcement colleagues are protecting the public from serious and organised crime. Anthony Hearn had been arrested, with a woman who was not later prosecuted for any related offences, for possessing the gun when it was found in the car in Hastings on March 1st, 2016. In July 2016, Mr. Hearn was sentenced to 11 years imprisonment after admitting possessing the firearm with intent to endanger life or enabling another to do so, possessing a prohibited automatic weapon, and possessing ammunition for a firearm without a certificate. 6 other men were also sentenced for their part in the plot and associated drugs ring. Jamie Peter Winchester, 25, unemployed, of Sandy Close, St Leonards, was found guilty and was sentenced to 7 years for supplying the TEC-9 style 9mm automatic submachine gun pistol with a silencer, and 3 years for possessing ammunition. John Gardner, 41, unemployed, of Egerton Road, Bexhill, was found guilty and was sentenced to 6 years for 2 offences of conspiracy to supply heroin and 9 years for conspiracy to supply cocaine. Scott Gardner, 40, a carpet fitter of Bexhill Road, St Leonards, was sentenced to 12 months, having pleaded guilty before the trial to money laundering. Wesley Long, 40, a tyre fitter of Harold Road, Hastings, was sentenced to 3 years, having admitted before the trial conspiracy to supply cocaine. Simon Grant, 45, a painter of Sheriff Road, London, was found not guilty of conspiracy to supply cocaine and money laundering. He had also separately pleaded guilty to possession of cannabis with intent to supply and was sentenced to 5 months, suspended for 18 months. Kenny Kelly, 37, unemployed, of Magony Close, London. Stephen Kelly, 48, unemployed, of Dominion Drive, London, and Anthony Hearn, 45, unemployed, of no fixed address, were found not guilty of conspiracy to murder the 2 people. James Dunham, 37, unemployed, of Roundhouse Crescent, Peach Haven, did not appear at court to be sentenced for conspiracy to supply cocaine and will be sentenced at a later date. Judge Christine Lane said to Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell, "You are utterly ruthless men who were ready to murder 2 people. Over £1 million worth of drugs and over £100,000 in cash was seized in the constant battle against Class A drugs." She commended all the police officers and staff in the operation, which she said had often involved working very, very long hours. In separate proceedings in 2015 and 2016, 7 other people had been sentenced as a result of the same police investigation associated with the extensive drugs ring. At Hastings Magistrate Court, Amelia Stock, 21, unemployed, of Mountbatten Close, Hastings, admitting offering to supply cannabis and was sentenced to 60 hours unpaid community work and a £60 fine. Kobe Lloyd, 19, unemployed, of London Road, Bexhill, admitting offering to supply cannabis and was given a 12-month suspended sentence and 100 hours of unpaid community work. 5 men were convicted and sentenced at Crown Court after acting as drugs runners for Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell. Christopher Walsh, also known as Marsh, 31, then of Holmhurst Lane, Hastings, was given 56 months imprisonment at Oxford Crown Court for possession with intent to supply 1 kilo of heroin. Luke Fitzgerald, 28, of Edinburgh Road, St Leonards, was given 40 months imprisonment at Oxford Crown Court for possession with intent to supply 1 kilo of heroin. Carlton Meldrum, 25, of The Ridge, St Leonards, received a 5-year sentence for possession of 3 kilos of heroin with intent to supply. He was further sentenced at Snaresbrook Crown Court to 7 years for a further offence of possession of 3 kilos of heroin with intent to supply. Jed Bullard, 28, of Moor Lane, Westfield, near Hastings, was sentenced at Lewes Crown Court to 10 years for conspiracy to supply cocaine, possession with intent to supply MDMA and meth, and amphetamine, possession of cannabis, money laundering, and possessing an offensive weapon. Palv Rinslick, 21, then of Victoria Avenue, Hastings, was sentenced to 4 years for conspiracy to supply cocaine and possession of heroin. So what are your thoughts about this Sussex-based drugs ring that was led by Mr. Ellis and Mr. Caswell, along with numerous associates and runners, and due to raids against their drugs ring, started to plot to murder their suppliers over a substantial drugs debt? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, stay safe.